Close your eyes for a moment. I want you to conduct a little mental experiment with me, something that might feel almost blasphemous to a die-hard fan, but trust me, we are going somewhere profound with this. I want you to imagine Guts, the Black Swordsman, standing on a hill, but instead of that thick, suffocating darkness that Miura inks into every corner of the page, imagine the sky is a bright, saturated blue. Imagine Guts' armor is shining, polished, reflecting the sunlight like a knight in a standard fantasy RPG. Now look at the Dragonslayer. In this alternate reality, written by a standard shonen author, that sword isn't a slab of raw iron. It's a legendary blade with a glowing rune. Maybe it has a spirit inside it that talks to Guts, offering him power-ups when he's low on mana. Can you see it? Can you feel how wrong it is? It makes your skin crawl, doesn't it? It feels like a betrayal. And that visceral reaction you are feeling right now, that rejection of a lighter version of Berserk, is exactly where we need to start our journey today. We are going to explore the terrifying, beautiful genius of Kentaro Miura by asking the question, what if Berserk was written by someone else? By asking this, we aren't just engaging in fan fiction. We are holding a mirror up to what makes this manga a singularity in the world of art. We are going to peel back the layers of ink and trauma to understand why no one else could have told this story. And why, if they had tried, it would have been a completely different, likely forgettable experience. Let's start with the most obvious physical manifestation of Berserk's philosophy, the Dragonslayer. In the hands of a different creator, this weapon would just be a big, cool sword. We see this in countless imitators. You have the protagonist with the oversized weapon, swinging it around like it's made of styrofoam. If this were a standard action series, the sword would be a symbol of power, a trophy of strength. But Miura hates us. Miura loves us. Miura understood that the sword isn't a power fantasy. It is a burden. When you look at those panels, and I mean really look at them, zoom in until you can see the grain of the paper, you realize that Miura draws the weight. He doesn't use speed lines to make it look light and fast. He uses thick, heavy hatching to show you that lifting this thing is an act of physical torture. If a different mangaka were writing this, Guts would swing the sword, shout a technique name like Void Slash, and the enemy would split cleanly in two. In Berserk, there are no technique names. There is no glory in the swing. There is just the sickening crunch of bone and the tearing of meat. It is industrial. It is ugly. It sounds like a car crash. Miura treats the Dragonslayer not as a weapon, but as a physical anchor that keeps Guts tethered to a reality that wants to blow him away. This is crucial, because it sets the tone for the entire psychological landscape of the series. If the sword was magical, if it was light, Guts would be a superhero. But because it is just a heap of raw iron, Guts is just a man pushing himself beyond the breaking point. That distinction is everything. Now, let's go deeper into the ink itself. We have to talk about the art style, because in manga, the art is the narrative. If you look at the landscape of modern manga or manhwa, there is a trend toward cleaner, digital lines. It's efficient, it's readable, and it's often beautiful. But imagine Berserk drawn with clean digital lines. Imagine the eclipse with smooth gradients and perfectly applied screen tones. It would lose its soul. Why? Because Miura's art style is defined by struggle. I am not using that word lightly. The very act of drawing Berserk was a struggle against the white page. Miura was famous for his obsession with cross-hatching, drawing thousands of tiny, intersecting lines to create shadow and texture. He didn't just fill in a black space, he scratched the darkness into existence. When you look at the armor of the Berserker or the fur on Zod, you're seeing millions of pen strokes. A different artist, prioritizing a weekly schedule or a cleaner aesthetic, would have simplified this. They would have used darkness as a color. Miura uses darkness as a texture. It feels gritty. You can almost feel the mud and the dried blood under your fingernails when you read the conviction arc. This density of detail creates a claustrophobic atmosphere that a cleaner style simply cannot replicate. It forces you, the reader, to struggle through the page just as Guts struggles through the world. You cannot scan Berserk, you have to endure it. This is a deliberate narrative choice. The world of Berserk is messy, chaotic, and overwhelming. If the art were clean, it would imply that the world is orderly. By making the art dense and chaotic, Miura bypasses your logical brain and speaks directly to your nervous system. You feel the exhaustion. Let's pivot to the narrative structure and the concept of the monster. In a typical fantasy story, written by almost anyone else, monsters are obstacles to be overcome to gain experience points. They are external threats. You kill the dragon, you save the village, you get the gold. In Berserk, the monsters are rarely just biological creatures. They are manifestations of psychological horror. But here is the what-if twist. If another writer handled the apostles, they would likely just be evil generals. They would have cool designs, sure, but they would be functionally identical to generic villains. Miura does something that disturbs us on a primal level. He blends the sexual and the violent, the sacred and the profane. The apostles look like nightmares drawn by someone who has stared too long into the abyss of the human id. They are phallic, grotesque, pathetic, and terrifying all at once. A different writer might shy away from the sexual violence or the sheer grotesquerie to make the series more marketable or palatable. They would sanitize the horror, but by sanitizing it, they would remove the central thesis of the series, that humanity, when unchecked, is the scariest monster of all. The apostles aren't aliens. They are humans who gave in to their darkest desires. Miura forces us to look at a giant, slug-like monster and recognize the human face of the Count within it. He forces us to see the tragedy inside the horror. A standard writer would give us a boss fight. Miura gives us a therapy session from hell. Think about the pacing of the revelations. We live in an era of mystery box storytelling, where writers withhold information just to keep you hooked, only to reveal a lackluster answer later. If Berserk were written by a lesser writer, the nature of the God Hand and the Skull Knight would have been explained in a handy exposition dump in Volume 5. We would have a clear magic system with rules and power levels. Oh, Guts has a power level of 5,000, and Femto is 9,000. We crave that simplicity. We want to know how the world works. Miura denies us this comfort. He treats the supernatural elements of his world with a sense of Lovecraftian awe and terror. We don't know exactly what the Skull Knight is. We don't fully understand the physics of the astral world. And that ignorance keeps us in the same headspace as Guts. We are stumbling through the dark, learning as we go. If the magic system were explained, the horror would vanish. You cannot fear what you fully understand. Miura understood that the unknown is the breeding ground for anxiety, and he cultivated that anxiety masterfully. He allows the mystery to breathe, sometimes for decades. This patience is rare. A different creator, pressured by editors to keep the pacing fast, would have rushed these explanations, turning the cosmic horror of the God Hand into a generic council of villains. And what about the protagonist himself? This is perhaps the biggest divergence point in our what-if scenario. If Guts were written by a standard shonen archetype writer, his trauma would be a backstory element that he eventually gets over through the power of friendship. We've seen it 1,000 times. The hero has a dark past. He meets a spunky girl and a loyal best friend. They give him a speech about how he doesn't have to be alone. And suddenly, he is healed. He unlocks a new power because he wants to protect his friends. It's a beautiful sentiment, but it is not Berserk. Miura knew that trauma doesn't work like that. Trauma isn't a level you beat. It's a chronic condition you manage. Guts doesn't get over the eclipse. He carries it. It warps him. It makes him dangerous to the people he loves. A different writer would have made Guts a cool anti-hero who says edgy one-liners, but has a heart of gold that is easily accessible. Miura made Guts genuinely unpleasant at the start of the Black Swordsman arc. He was cruel, dismissive, and seemingly heartless. He allows Guts to be unlikable because he trusts the audience to stick around long enough to understand why. This is a massive gamble that most writers wouldn't take. They would be too afraid of alienating the audience. Miura didn't care. He needed us to hate Guts a little bit so that we could love him more deeply later when we understood the source of his rage. Consider the role of destiny or causality. In most stories, destiny is something the hero is born for. He is the chosen one. He pulls the sword from the stone because he was prophesied to do so. In Berserk, Guts is the anti-chosen one. He wasn't born to save the world. He was born from a hanging corpse. His very existence is a statistical error. If this were a different story, Guts would have a secret royal lineage. He would be the lost son of a great king, justifying his strength. How boring would that be? How cheap would that feel? The brilliance of Miura's writing is that Guts is a nobody. He is a struggler, not because of his bloodline, but in spite of it. He fights against causality, while a typical protagonist would be surfing the wave of destiny. This flips the entire narrative structure of the hero's journey on its head. Guts isn't answering a call to adventure. He is surviving a call to slaughter. A different writer would have tried to give Guts a destiny to validate his importance. Miura validates his importance through his refusal to accept destiny. That is a philosophical chasm that separates Berserk from 99% of other fantasies. Now, I want to touch on something that often gets overlooked, the silence. If you read modern comics or manga, they are often dense with dialogue. Characters explain their feelings. They narrate their moves. They monologue about their ideologies. Miura was a master of the silent panel. Think of the moments after a battle where Guts just sits there, panting, bleeding. No thought bubbles, no narration, just the image of a man who is absolutely spent. A different writer would feel the need to fill that silence. I am so tired, but I must go on. For Casca. We don't need to read that. We can see it in the way Guts' shoulders slump. We can see it in the shaking of his hand. Miura's confidence in his visual storytelling allowed him to strip away the text, leaving us with a raw emotion. It creates a contemplative atmosphere that is almost meditative. In a different writer's hands, the constant chatter would break the spell. The silence of Berserk is where the tragedy lives. It allows the reader to project their own feelings onto Guts. When he is silent, we fill the gap with our own exhaustion, our own struggles. We become him. Let's talk about the Beast of Darkness. In a standard shonen, this would be a literal demon possessed him, like Kurama in Naruto or Sukuna in Jujutsu Kaisen. It would be an external entity that grants him power at a cost. They would have conversations in an inner mindscape. Lend me your power, Guts. No, I will do this myself. You can hear the generic dialogue, can't you? But Miura did something infinitely more terrifying. The beast of darkness isn't a demon. It is Guts. It is the manifestation of his own trauma, his rage, and his dog-eat-dog worldview. It's the part of him that wants to let go and just kill everything. It's the intrusive thought that says, it would be easier if I just stopped caring. By making the monster internal and psychological, Miura turns every battle into two battles. The physical fight against the apostle, and the mental fight against his own nature. A different writer would have externalized this conflict to make it easier to draw and write. Miura kept it internal, making it a constant, gnawing presence. This means that Guts is never safe, not even when he is alone, especially not when he is alone. This adds a layer of psychological horror that a demon possession trope simply cannot achieve. We also have to acknowledge the humor, or the lack thereof, in the wrong places. A different writer, trying to break the tension, might have inserted comic relief characters much earlier or more intrusively. We see this in the 2016 anime adaptation, which felt tone-deaf. But Miura introduced Puck not just as a joke, but as a necessary narrative device to keep the story from becoming so bleak that readers would stop reading. Puck is the empathy that Guts has lost. In the early arcs, Puck feels the emotions of the people dying around them, acting as a surrogate heart for the Black Swordsman. A lesser writer would have made Puck just a goofy sidekick. Miura made him a thematic counterweight. Without Puck, the Black Swordsman arc is just a slasher movie. With Puck, it becomes a tragedy about a man who has lost his humanity, observed by a creature that is pure emotion. The balance is delicate. A different writer would have tipped the scales too far toward comedy, to lighten the mood, ruining the atmosphere, or too far toward darkness, making it melodramatic edgelord fiction. Miura walked that razor's edge for 30 years. So, as we close this first chapter of our exploration, I want you to sit with that image we started with. The shiny, magical sword, the clean lines, the void slash attack, the healed trauma. It feels hollow, doesn't it? It feels like a lie. Because deep down we know that life isn't like that. Life is heavy. It has texture. It leaves scars. Miura didn't just write a story about a guy with a sword. He captured the texture of suffering and the weight of endurance. He rejected the easy tropes of his genre to give us something harder, something that hurts to read, but heals us in the process. He looked at the darkness and didn't try to brighten it up with filters. He forced us to stare into it until our eyes adjusted. And that, my friends, is why the authorship matters, because anyone can write a story about a hero winning. Only Kentaro Miura could write a story about a human surviving. And we are just getting started. In the next chapter, we are going to walk into the eclipse, not just as a plot point, but as the ultimate test of this hypothesis. We are going to look at Griffith and ask, what if the White Hawk was just a villain? The answer might terrify you. Welcome back to the operating table. If the first chapter was about dissecting the body of Guts to see what makes him tick, this chapter is about staring into the blinding light that casts his shadow. We are going to talk about Griffith. We are going to talk about the Golden Age, and most importantly, we are going to talk about the eclipse. I need you to brace yourself, because this is where the what-if scenario stops being an interesting thought experiment and starts becoming a terrifying lesson in narrative courage. In a parallel universe, written by a standard fantasy author, the Golden Age arc is the entire story. It's a story about a ragtag band of mercenaries rising to nobility. Guts is the rough-around-the-edges warrior, Griffith is the brilliant tactician, and Casca is the fiery love interest. In this generic version, the story ends with them defeating the Emperor, Griffith becoming king, Guts becoming his general, and everyone living happily ever after. Maybe there is a bit of political intrigue, maybe a love triangle that gets resolved with a polite nod, but ultimately, it is a story of ascent. It is clean. It is heroic. It is safe. But Miura looks at that standard fantasy structure and sees it for what it is, a facade. He spends 12 volumes, building up this beautiful lie, only to tear it down in the most horrific way imaginable. If a different mangaka were writing this, Griffith would be the rival character. You know the archetype. The cool, aloof genius who clashes with the hot-headed protagonist, but ultimately respects him. They would cross swords, trade insults, but when the chips are down, they would fight back to back against the real villain. Griffith would be a Vegeta, a Sasuke. He would be edgy, but ultimately on the side of good. Miura subverts this by making Griffith genuinely angelic. He isn't dark in the early Golden Age. He is luminous. He is the White Hawk. He inspires genuine hope. This is crucial because a different writer would have telegraphed the betrayal. They would have shown Griffith kicking a puppy or laughing maniacally in the shadows to let the audience know, hey, don't trust this guy. Miura respects us enough to make us fall in love with Griffith too. We want him to succeed. We are seduced by his dream, just like the Band of the Hawk. That makes the knife in our back feel real. If he were written as a villain from the start, we would just be waiting for the inevitable. By writing him as a savior, Miura makes the betrayal a trauma rather than a plot twist. Let's zoom in on the concept of the dream. In 99% of shonen manga, having a dream is an unqualified good. I'm going to be the pirate king. I'm going to be the Hokage. The narrative rewards this ambition. The universe bends to help the dreamer. If Berserk were written by someone else, Griffith's dream of a kingdom would be framed as a noble pursuit. The narrative would justify the sacrifices. He does it for the greater good, the other characters would say. Miura, with his brutal genius, asks the uncomfortable question, what is the actual price of a dream? He shows us the pile of corpses. He doesn't shy away from the fact that Griffith finances his dream with the lives of young men and boys who idolize him. A different writer would gloss over the dead soldiers as necessary casualties. Miura gives them names. He introduces us to the little guys, the ones who just want to be a part of something, only to show us that, to Griffith, they are just cobblestones on the road to his castle. The bonfire of dreams scene would be completely different in a standard manga. It would be a pep talk. Guts would say, your dream is amazing, Griffith. And Griffith would say, we will do it together. Instead, Miura gives us a scene of profound existential dread, where Guts realizes he has no fire of his own. It's a deconstruction of the very trope of the ambitious hero. Now, let's talk about the turning point, the torture. In a standard fantasy story, if the perfect leader gets captured, it's usually in a glorious battle. He sacrifices himself to save his friends, holding off the enemy army. He is captured as a hero. How does Miura handle it? Griffith falls because of a moment of pathetic human weakness. He sleeps with the princess not as a strategic move, but because he is emotionally devastated that Guts left him. He creates his own downfall out of fragility, not heroism. A different writer would be terrified to show their cool character making such a stupid, emotional mistake. It makes Griffith look weak. It makes him look petty. And that is exactly the point. When we see Griffith in the dungeon after a year of torture, a standard writer would have him keep his dignity. He would be defiant. He would be plotting his escape. Miura shows us a broken thing, a mute, crippled, flayed creature that can't even hold a sword. This level of degradation is uncomfortable. It's humiliating. A different writer would rush to heal him. Oh, here is a magic potion. Now he is back to normal. Miura says no. The damage is permanent. The tongue is gone. The tendons are cut. This irreversibility is what forces the choice of the eclipse. If Griffith could have recovered, the eclipse wouldn't have been necessary. Miura backs him into a corner where his only choice is to die as a cripple or live as a demon. That is writing with consequences, and here we are, the eclipse. This is the moment that separates the tourists from the residents of the abyss. If you take one thing away from this analysis, let it be this. A different writer would not have let the eclipse happen. Or, if they did, it would have been an interrupted ritual. Picture the standard version. The sky turns dark. The monsters appear. Griffith is about to say, "I sacrifice." But then, Guts bursts through the dimension wall. He screams, "Griffith, don't do it!" Griffith hesitates. He looks at his friends. He looks at the power. And he chooses his friends. The Behelit breaks. The monsters fade away. Everyone hugs. It's the power of friendship ending. It's satisfying. It's sweet. And it is utterly false to the reality Miura built. Miura built a world on causality. He built a character defined by absolute ambition. For Griffith to choose his friends over his dream would be a betrayal of his character. It would be a cop-out. Miura had the guts, pun intended, to follow the logic of his character to its absolute, darkest conclusion. When the slaughter begins, a standard action writer would turn it into a battle. The Band of the Hawk would fight back. Pippin would kill 10 apostles before going down. Judo would find a weak spot in the monsters. It would be tragic, but badass. Miura doesn't give us a battle. He gives us a massacre. He gives us a feeding frenzy. The Hawks don't die as heroes. They die as food. They are ripped apart, eaten alive, crushed. It is chaotic, undignified, and terrifying. There is no music swelling in the background. There is just screaming and the sound of chewing. This shift from dark fantasy adventure to cosmic horror is a tonal whiplash that no editor at a mainstream magazine would approve today if a new writer pitched it. You're going to kill the whole cast? The ones we spent 12 volumes loving? You can't do that. Miura did it. He burned the bridge so thoroughly that there was no going back. He forced the reader to feel the total powerlessness of humanity against the supernatural. If the Hawks had put up a good fight, it would imply that humans stand a chance. By having them slaughtered like cattle, Miura establishes the scale of the threat. The God Hand are not just strong enemies. They are gods. And we must discuss the violation of Casca. This is the most controversial, painful, and difficult moment in the series. In a what-if scenario written by a standard writer, this simply does not happen. Maybe Femto threatens her, but Guts breaks free just in time. He cuts off the wing, saves the girl, and they escape. The damsel in distress is saved. Miura goes to a place of darkness that is hard to even articulate. He uses this moment not for titillation, but to inflict the ultimate spiritual wound on Guts. It is an act of dominance, of spite, of severing the last tie to humanity. It destroys Casca's mind. It destroys Guts' soul. It creates the demon child. It creates the brand. It is the radioactive core of the trauma that drives the rest of the series. If this moment were sanitized, if Guts had saved her in time, the rest of the story loses its engine. The rage that defines the Black Swordsman would just be anger. But because of what happened, it is an apoplectic, suicidal fury that transcends reason. A different writer would want to keep Casca as a waifu character, capable of fighting and bantering. Miura breaks her to show that some traumas don't just leave scars, they shatter the self. It is a bold, devastating narrative choice that prioritizes emotional truth over character utility. Consider the Behelit itself. In a different story, it's a cursed artifact, a villain trick. Griffith is possessed by the evil amulet. It wasn't his fault. The amulet made him do it. This absolves the character of responsibility. It allows for a redemption arc later. I'm sorry, Guts. The amulet controlled me. Miura rejects this easy out. The God Hand explicitly tells Griffith, "This is what you wanted. You paved this road with corpses." The Behelit doesn't force the choice. It enables it. Griffith has to say the words, "I sacrifice." It is an act of free will. This is the terror of Berserk. It's not that demons exist. It's that a human chose to become one. It is the banality of evil. It is the terrifying realization that the person you loved and admired is capable of sacrificing you for a promotion. A different writer would make the villain a monster from the start. Miura shows us that monsters are made one choice at a time. Let's look at the immediate aftermath, the birth of the Black Swordsman. In a standard story, after a tragedy, the hero mourns, trains for a montage, and then sets out with a grim determination. Guts doesn't just set out, he goes insane. The early Black Swordsman arc, which was written first, but chronologically comes after, shows a Guts who is unhinged. He uses the Count's daughter as a human shield. He laughs at suffering. He is cruel. A different writer would soften this. He's hurting, but he's still a good guy deep down. Miura lets Guts be a villain for a while. He lets him be consumed by the beast. He shows us that trauma doesn't make you noble. It makes you toxic. It makes you push people away. It makes you dangerous. This is a level of psychological realism that is absent in most power fantasies. Guts isn't fighting for justice in those early days. He is fighting for revenge. There is no nobility in it. It is ugly. And because it is ugly, it feels real. We recognize that ugly part of ourselves that wants to lash out when we are hurt. So, as we stand here in the bloody aftermath of the Eclipse, looking at the branded neck of our protagonist, we have to admit something. If this were written by anyone else, it would be easier to digest. We wouldn't feel this sick pit in our stomachs. We would have cheered for the heroes, booed the villains, and moved on to the next series. But because Miura wrote it, because he refused to look away, we are trapped here. We are branded too. We carry the weight of those deaths. We feel the betrayal of Griffith not as a plot point, but as a personal insult. We have been educated in the cruelty of causality. And now, the real struggle begins. Because the easy part was the golden age. The easy part was the dream. Now, we have to wake up in the nightmare. In the next chapter, we are going to walk the lonely path of the Black Swordsman. We are going to ask, what if the party never came back? What if Guts remained a monster? We will explore the conviction arc and the terrifying brilliance of finding faith in a godless world. We have survived the eclipse, Barely. We are bleeding, we are branded, and we are angry. But now we enter the phase of the story that often gets misunderstood, yet defines the philosophical core of Berserk, the conviction arc. This is where the what-if scenario becomes a study in redemption and complexity. In a standard manga, written by a standard author, after the tragic backstory, the hero would immediately start gathering a new team. He would meet a healer, a rogue, and a mage in the next town. They would form a new band of the Hawk to avenge the old one. It would be a story of rebuilding. But Miura forces Guts to walk alone. For 2 years, in canon and several volumes, Guts is a solitary force of nature. This period of isolation is critical. A different writer would rush the reunion. They would be afraid that a solo protagonist is boring. Miura trusts that the internal monologue of a man fighting his own demons is just as compelling as a team fight. He lets Guts stew in his own toxicity. He lets him become the Black Swordsman, not as a title of honor, but as a warning label. This solitude is where the character is forged. It's where the struggle shifts from physical survival to spiritual survival. Let's talk about the Lost Children chapter. This is arguably the darkest point in the entire series. Guts fighting Rosine. In a what-if version, Rosine would be a clearly evil witch. She would look like a hag or a monster. Guts would kill her, save the village, and be the hero. But Miura makes Rosina sympathetic. She is a child who wanted to be an elf, to escape an abusive home. Her evil is a twisted form of escapism. A different writer would not have the stomach to have their hero fight children, literal children who have been turned into insects. It's taboo. It's grotesque. Miura goes there. He forces Guts to slice through these child moths to get to Rosine. It challenges the reader's morality. We want Guts to win, but do we want him to kill a misguided girl? A standard writer would give Rosine a redemption moment before death. She would turn back into a human and say, "Thank you for freeing me." Miura denies us that closure. She dies reaching for her dream, still a monster. And Guts? He doesn't feel like a hero. He feels like an exterminator. This moral ambiguity is Miura's signature. He refuses to give us clean victories. Every win leaves a stain. Now, consider the setting of the Tower of Conviction, religious horror. In a standard fantasy, the church is either good, paladins fighting demons, or cartoonishly evil, corrupt bishop summoning demons. While Mazgas fits the evil mold visually, Miura gives him a terrifying depth. Mazgas genuinely believes he is doing God's work. He isn't a hypocrite. He tortures people to save their souls. A different writer would make Mazgas a secret demon worshipper. Miura makes him a devout believer. This is infinitely more frightening. It suggests that humans don't need demons to do evil. They just need conviction. The horror of the conviction arc isn't just the slime monsters. It's the mob mentality. It's the refugees desperate for a savior, willing to burn witches to feel safe. A standard writer would focus on the monsters attacking the tower. Miura focuses on the social breakdown inside the tower. He explores how fear makes people irrational and cruel. He holds a mirror up to our own history of inquisitions and witch hunts. It's a sociological critique wrapped in a dark fantasy. Let's re-examine Puck in this arc. In our what-if scenario, Puck is just the comic relief. But in the conviction arc, Puck becomes the moral compass. He challenges Guts. Are you just going to let them die? A different writer would have Puck be a cheerleader. You can do it, Guts. Miura uses Puck to voice the reader's growing discomfort with Guts's callousness. When Guts says, "If you're always worried about crushing the ants beneath you, you won't be able to walk," It sounds cool, but Puck's reaction shows us that it's also sociopathic. Miura uses the contrast between the tiny, light-hearted elf and the massive, brooding swordsman to create a dialectic about empathy versus survival. Without Puck, Guts would have become a villain in this arc. Puck is the anchor that keeps Guts from drifting completely into the abyss. A lesser writer would minimize the fairy because it doesn't fit the dark tone. Miura understands that you need the light to define the shadow. Then there is the introduction of Farnese. This is a masterclass in character writing in a standard story. The female antagonist who hunts the hero is usually a sexy villainess who eventually falls in love with him after he defeats her in combat. She would be confident and strong. Miura writes Farnese as a repressively religious, sadistic, terrified woman who gets off on burning people because it's the only outlet for her suppressed emotions. It is deeply psychological and uncomfortable. A different writer would shy away from the sexual undertones of her religious ecstasy. Miura dives right into the psychosexual pathology of repression. When she confronts Guts, she isn't defeated by his sword. She's defeated by his worldview. Guts shatters her entire belief system, not by fighting her, but by existing outside of her God's grace and still surviving. Praying won't change a thing, he tells her. The hands of the dead don't clap. A standard writer would have them clash blades. Miura has them clash philosophies. Farnese's transformation from a leader of the Holy Iron Chain Knights to a humble magic student is one of the best character arcs in manga history. A different writer would have kept her as a strong female warrior archetype. Miura allowed her to be weak, to be pathetic, so she could rebuild herself into someone truly strong. He allows characters to change fundamentally, not just power up. The rebirth ceremony, the fake eclipse. A different writer would have used this to bring Griffith back as a terrifying monster king, ruling from a throne of skulls, a generic Dark Lord. Miura brings Griffith back as the Messiah. He is beautiful. He is glowing. He saves the day. This is the what-if twist that breaks your brain. The villain returns not to destroy the world, but to save it. He brings order. He brings safety. He brings Falconia. A standard narrative teaches us that evil looks like evil. Miura teaches us that evil can look like salvation. The people in the story love Griffith. They worship him. This makes Guts' position even more isolated. If he fights Griffith now, he isn't fighting a monster. He is fighting the world's savior. He becomes the villain in the eyes of the public. This inversion is brilliant. It strips Guts of moral support. A different writer would have the people realize Griffith is evil. Oh no, he's a demon. Miura has them crying tears of joy as the White Hawk descends. It complicates the conflict. It's not just good versus evil. It's ugly truth versus beautiful lie. And we must talk about the sword again, specifically the clang. Just kidding. But seriously, let's talk about the Dragonslayer entering the astral plane. In a standard fantasy, the sword would get a magic upgrade. A gem would be embedded in the hilt. It would glow blue. It would get a name like Soul Calibur. Miura does something much more subtle. He says that because the sword has killed so many demons, it has become soaked in their malice and now exists on both planes. It's not a power-up in the video game sense. It's a consequence of the carnage. The sword is haunted. This fits the theme perfectly. Everything in Berserk carries weight. Everything accumulates. A different writer would just say, Guts leveled up. Miura says, Guts has waded through so much blood that reality is bending around him It anchors the fantastical element in the physical labor of the character. Let's look at Isidro, the kid's sidekick. In a standard shonen, Isidro would be a hidden prodigy. Guts would train him, and within a few chapters, Isidro would be taking down apostles. He would be Guts Jr. Miura keeps Isidro realistic. He is a weak kid. He throws rocks. He runs away. He is annoying. But he is brave. He is useful in small, scrappy ways. He grounds the combat. When Guts fights, it's mythic. When Isidro fights, it's a street brawl. This contrast highlights just how superhuman Guts is. If Isidro were too strong, it would diminish Guts. A different writer would try to make Isidro cool to sell merchandise to younger readers. Miura keeps him as a representation of the immature ambition that Guts used to have, allowing Guts to see his younger self and mentor him, not in swordplay, but in survival. As we close the book on the conviction arc, we see the pattern clearly. A different mangaka would have given us a linear power fantasy. Miura gave us a spiral of trauma and recovery. He took the coolest character, Guts, and showed us that his coolness is a coping mechanism for profound pain. He took the villain, Griffith, and made him the world's beloved hero. He took the monsters and put them inside the church. He flipped every expectation not for the sake of a twist, but for the sake of the truth that the world is messy, that morality is a matter of perspective, and that sometimes the only way to find the light is to burn the tower down. We are now ready for the final leg of our journey. The boat, the armor, the island. In the next chapter, we will explore the Millennium Falcon arc and the Fantasia arc. We will ask, what if the armor didn't eat you? What if the destination wasn't the end? And ultimately, we will confront the legacy of a story left unfinished, and why that might be the most berserk ending of all. Here we are, the final leg of our journey through the abyss. We have survived the Golden Age, endured the eclipse, and crawled through the mud of the conviction arc. Now we enter the era of the Millennium Falcon and Fantasia. This is where the what-if scenario becomes a battle for the soul of the story itself. In a standard manga, this would be the power escalation arc. The enemies get stronger, so the hero gets a new transformation. Enter the Berserker armor. If this were written by a typical shonen author, this armor would be a glorious upgrade. Guts would don the sleek black suit, his power level would triple, and he would unlock a move called Darkness Blast. He would control it perfectly after a brief training montage. It would be cool. It would be merchandise ready, but Miura looks at the concept of a power-up and twists it into a curse. The Berserker armor doesn't just give Guts strength. It turns off his preservation instinct. It doesn't heal him. It pierces his flesh with steel spikes to hold his broken bones together so he can keep fighting until he bleeds out. It is a suicide suit. A different writer would frame this as indomitable will. Miura frames it as a terrifying addiction to rage. When Guts puts on that helmet, he isn't a hero. He is a rabid dog. The armor is a metaphor for the very thing that kept him alive, his trauma. If he relies on it too much, it will consume the human parts of him, leaving only the monster. The tragedy is that he needs it to protect his friends, but using it endangers them. It is a paradox of power that a lesser writer would never explore. The clank of the armor isn't a sound of victory. It is the sound of a coffin closing. And who is he protecting? The new band of the Hawk, or as some detractors call it, the JRPG party. In a standard story, the introduction of Shirka, Serpico, Farnese, and Isidro would be a return to form. The gang is back together. They would be distinct archetypes. The mage, the rogue, the healer. They would have fun banter. They would combine attacks. But Miura uses this group to deconstruct the lone wolf trope he spent the last arc building. Guts hates relying on them initially. It hurts his pride. It scares him. A different writer would have Guts accept them immediately because friendship is magic. Miura makes it a slow, painful process of Guts learning to trust again. He shows us the friction. He shows us that Guts is a terrible leader at first, too protective, too distant. The brilliance of Shirka isn't that she casts fireballs. It's that she is the only one who can pull Guts out of the armor's madness. She is the anchor. This creates a dependency that is deeply emotional. In a standard action series, the little girl mage is a mascot. In Berserk, she is the therapist keeping a veteran from succumbing to PTSD. The dynamic is flipped. The strongest physical character is entirely dependent on the weakest physical character to keep his sanity. That is narrative balance. Now, let's sail to the controversial boat arc. For years, fans joked about being stuck on the boat. But in our what-if analysis, the boat is essential. A different writer would have fast-traveled to Elfhelm. 3 weeks later, they arrived. Action, explosion, boss fight. Miura slows the pace down to a crawl. Why? Because healing is slow. The journey on the seahorse is where the characters actually talk to each other. It's where Farnese learns magic and finds self-worth. It's where Guts contemplates his declining health. The sea god fight often gets criticized as filler, but look closer. It's a fight against a giant, ancient heart beating inside a cavern. Guts has to cut the heart of the island. It is visceral, wet, and exhausting. A different writer would have made it a spectacle. Miura makes it an ordeal. He forces us to feel the weight of every day spent at sea. He forces us to wait. This patience allows the relationships to marinate. When they finally reach Elfhelm, it feels earned, not because they fought a boss, but because they endured the journey. And then we arrive at the destination, Elfhelm, the land of high fantasy. In a standard story, this would be the happy village. Cute elves, magic trees, everything is sparkly. Miura draws it with a sense of whimsy that borders on the uncanny. It's too bright. It's too round. It contrasts so sharply with the rest of the world that it feels alien. And the Queen of the Elves isn't just a quest giver. She is a plot device to confront the central question. What if Casca doesn't want to wake up? A standard writer would never ask this. Of course she wants to wake up. She's the love interest. She needs to be fixed so she can kiss the hero. Miura posits a terrifying possibility. What if the brokenness is a defense mechanism? What if waking up means reliving the eclipse? The Corridor of Dreams sequence is a masterpiece of visual storytelling. Guts and Shirka aren't fighting monsters. They are fighting trauma triggers. They are walking through a landscape made of Casca's pain, the imagery of the black dog dragging the coffin, the fragmented memories of the Golden Age. It is heartbreaking. A different writer would have made this a literal dungeon. Miura makes it a psychological landscape. And the resolution? She wakes up. She sees Guts. And she screams. A standard writer would give us the hug, the kiss, the "I missed you." Miura gives us the scream. He respects the trauma too much to wave it away with a magic wand. Even with magic, the scars remain. That scream shatters the happy ending expectation and replaces it with a real ending. It hurts, but it is true. Meanwhile, What is Griffith doing? He is building Falconia. In a standard fantasy, the villain's lair is a dark fortress with spikes and lava. Griffith builds a utopia, a glistening white city where demons and humans live in peace. He brings the dead back to say goodbye to their families. He protects the citizens from the chaos outside. He is a good king. This is the ultimate subversion. A different writer would show Griffith kicking puppies in secret to remind us he is bad. Miura shows Griffith being a benevolent ruler. This is terrifying because it challenges Guts' entire mission. If Guts kills Griffith now, he destroys the last sanctuary for humanity. He becomes the terrorist. Miura traps Guts in a moral checkmate. Revenge is no longer just justice. It is an act of destruction against a seemingly perfect world. The what-if writer would make it easy. Griffith is actually eating the citizens. Miura makes it hard. Griffith is actually saving the citizens. It forces the reader to ask, is peace worth the price of submission? Is a comfortable lie better than a painful truth? We must also address the art evolution in these later arcs. The shift to digital. Some say it lost the grit. I say it gained etherealism. As the physical world and the astral world merge, the art style shifts to reflect that. It becomes cleaner, more detailed, in a high-resolution way, almost overwhelming in its intricacy. A different artist might have kept the gritty style of the Conviction arc, which wouldn't fit the high fantasy setting of Fantasia. Miura evolved his toolset to match his narrative. The double-page spreads of Falconia or the World Spiral Tree are not just drawings. They are architectural blueprints of a god's imagination. The sheer labor involved, the density of the leaves, the bricks in the city. It speaks to an artist who was trying to capture the infinite. A standard manga artist cuts corners to meet deadlines. Miura added corners. He added details that you would only see with a magnifying glass. He was drawing for eternity, not for next week's issue. And now we face the elephant in the room, the ending, or the lack thereof. Kentaro Miura passed away before finishing his masterpiece. In a what-if world, maybe he finished it. Maybe Guts killed Griffith. Maybe Griffith killed Guts. But we live in this reality. And there is a profound poetic tragedy in the fact that Berserk remains unfinished by his hand. The last panel he drew, or oversaw, was the Moonlight Boy transforming into Griffith and a single tear falling. It wasn't a scene of violence. It was a scene of longing, a scene of sadness. A different writer might have left us on a cliffhanger battle. Miura left us on an emotional cliffhanger, the tear. That single tear encapsulates the entire duality of Griffith, Femto, Moonlight Boy. It suggests that inside the god there is still a child who misses his parents. It is a note of quiet grace. Studio Gaga is continuing the work, and we wish them well. But let's stick to the what-if of Miura's legacy. Because the story stopped where it did, it forces us, the audience, to carry the burden of the conclusion. We have to imagine the ending, and in a way, that is the most Berserk outcome possible. The story has always been about the struggle, about fighting against a causality that is predetermined. By not having a definitive ending, the story defies its own causality. It remains in a state of flux. It is the ultimate struggle. We, the readers, are now the strugglers. We have to find our own meaning in the text. A standard story gives you the answer. The moral is X. Miura gave us the question, why do you struggle? And he left us to answer it ourselves. If Berserk had been written by anyone else, we would have a finished product on our shelf. It would be a complete set of 40 volumes with a beginning, middle, and end. We would read it, enjoy it, and put it away. But because it is Berserk, because it is Miura, it is a living thing. It is a wound that won't close. It is a conversation that won't end. It challenges us to look at our own lives, our own eclipses, our own beasts of darkness, our own desperate journeys on the boat, and find the will to keep going. Struggle, endure, contend. That isn't just a tagline. It is a command. A different writer would have told us that guts survived. Miura taught us how to survive. He taught us that survival isn't pretty. It isn't glorious. It involves vomiting, crying, crawling, and failing. But you do it anyway. You pick up the sword. You get off the boat. You look the monster in the eye. So, when you look at that black spine on your bookshelf, don't wish it was written by someone else who could have given you a cleaner, faster, happier story. Cherish the mess. Cherish the delays. Cherish the pain, because that pain is the proof that it was real. That pain is the connection between you and a genius who poured his lifeblood into ink so that you wouldn't feel so alone in the dark. Berserk is a mirror. If it were polished and perfect, you would only see the surface. Because it is cracked, jagged, and dark, you can see your soul. And that, my fellow strugglers, is why there is no what if. There is only Miura. There is only the struggle. And there is only the choice to keep reading, keep fighting, and keep walking, even when the path disappears. Thank you for walking this path with me. Now, go. The bonfire of dreams is waiting for you to find your own flame.